Because the character had a child, a little girl. They killed the girl and threw her body on the lawn of his house. And I'm playing this guy. And I went to Marty and I said, Marty Bond, the agent, I said, I read the script and I can't play it. And he said, why can't you play it? I said, I can't play it because this is a father and he has a child. And these guys kill her child to intimidate him. And the script permits that intimidation. So the writers feel that that's just for them a plot line. It's not important to them. And I said to him, I said, I can't play that because I have a father. And I know that my father would never be like that. I said, as a father, I would never be able to not attack those guys.
Hello, listeners. This is Warren Wade Anderson,
Reggie Valentin,
Mark Morosi,
Tony Sherry.
Welcome to the third episode of Antilles, a podcast forum where we discuss the contribution of Caribbean immigrants and their descendants to the arts and culture of the United States. The voice you just heard was the incredible Sidney Poitier. We believe that there are a few character traits that make Mr. Poitier a star and are represented in some of his films, most notably Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and In the Heat of the Night. In the first half of our talk, we focused on the charismatic and resolute side of his character, as captured in Stanley Kramer's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. We can also look back at the level of persistency and charm that elevated this former semi-literate dishwasher to the heights of the Academy Award and an honorary Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire. By the time Poitier landed his role as John Prentice in Kramer's commercially successful and controversial film, he was already a household name with two other films under his belt in that same year. Besides Kramer's feature, which was released in December 1967, Poitier also starred in To Sir With Love, released in June, and In the Heat of the Night, released in August. In this exchange, we'll look at the foil to John Prentice as Poitier shows the indignant and determined sides of his personality in the character of Virgil Tibbs through the lens of Norman Jewison's In the Heat of the Night. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Double Bill Movies, a book club for movies. Watch 2 movies and join us to talk about it. A forum for avid and casual movie watchers to discuss how this medium shapes the way we see the world around us. Go to doublebillmovies.com for more details. Also, please join us on April 20th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to talk about Sidney Poitier through the lens of his collaboration with Bill Cosby under 1970s comedy trilogy, Uptown Saturday Night, Let's Do It Again, and A Piece of the Action. Go to doublebillmovies.com/SidneyBill-trilogy for more details. Now, let's get back to the show. Why are we bringing in another movie? Because we already went through and reviewed Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Why are we talking about
this other balance to the man of Sidney Poitier?
For young people who might not have seen the film, because
context.
Yeah, why don't we talk about what the plot of the film is and the characters and what they represent before we get into all of
In
that.
the Heat of the Night was a movie about a man who was murdered, and they're trying to figure out who the killer is.
Right.
It happens.
What's the context?
The context?
Yeah.
Because
it happens in
Mississippi.
Mississippi, the fictional town of Sparta, Mississippi.
Right.
In which this black man is taking a train through Mississippi, and he happens to stop off at the station. Also that night, there was a murder. Police discovers this body,
Well,
and they're trying
before
to
you
find
say
it.
that, spoiler alert. We're going to delve into.
It's all spoilers.
It's all spoilers. Yeah.
Right.
So go ahead. Go on.
So the sheriff is now trying to find out who committed the murder. It's a small town. They go to the station. They see this black man, impeccably dressed black man, and he's arrested and taken into the station without even being questioned.
A black man at a train station
At night.
He must be running away from something.
Right.
Never mind the fact that he's well dressed. He has a briefcase
Right.
or suitcase.
But the main premise for arresting him was the sheriff took his wallet and saw that he had a lot of money.
Right.
So he assumed
How
that
could-
he
how could
robbed.
he have-
Yeah, how could
Well,
a black man?
before he discovered he had a lot of money, he already suspected him just
Right,
on sight.
because on site he pulled a gun on him.
Pulled a gun, yeah.
Right.
Didn't even question him. He just pulled a gun on him.
Right,
Just
even
because
though
he's
the
black.
character is reading a newspaper.
Newspaper, right.
Yeah. So, yeah, they take him in, and then that's when the plot begins to unfold because they find out that he's a police officer. He turns out to be the number one homicide detective from Philadelphia.
Right.
And they enlist him to find out who the murderer was and is. Sidney Poitier is playing Virgil Tibbs, right? The detective. Right. The sheriff is played by Rod Steiger. The deputy is played by Warren Oates. And then there are other actors that sort of come into play. And we'll get into them
Right.
as we get into it. But
I wanted to get to this scene of
Slap.
him questioning Endicott because I wanted to bring the contrast in character and his personal life as well. Because
right, in contrast to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
right, he goes to interrogate. Well, not really interrogate, to really question. It's a soft questioning. You know, he gets information that this man is considered to be a rival of the person that passed away, that died, that was murdered.
Right.
He goes with the sheriff to talk to Endicott. Endicott, at the outset, seems very welcoming.
And who's Endicott? Because
Endicott he's like a cotton magnate.
well,
He has a plantation.
he's literally a modern plantation owner.
Plantation owner, right? And you see the scene where they're driving up to his property, and you see people picking cotton.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is, I think that's like an anachronism in 1967, since slavery ended a century before that.
But also you have cotton picking machines. So
right, to see, and the director
Symbolism there.
Jewison zoomed in to the actual hands picking the cotton.
Yes.
Which to me is very telling of, have we really changed the society? Fast forward even to now, have we really changed the society? We're talking about cotton,
But also
we really haven't we haven't changed that.
But also in a visual way, it gives you idea of who Endicott is,
Right.
because this is all his.
And what I find interesting is he is such a well-spoken, gracious host.
Very cultured, seemingly.
It's almost in contradiction to who he actually is.
His presentational self is not his real self.
He has tremendous social etiquette, and he welcomes Virgil Tibbs.
He calls him Mr.
Mr. Tibbs.
Yes.
Calls him Mr. Tibbs.
Yeah.
Something that he hasn't heard from anybody in that
In the town up until that point.
Okay, calls him Virgil Tibbs, or Mr. Tibbs, but upon him recognizing that he's being questioned and linked to that murder, he slaps the hell out of Poitier, and without even a second hesitation, my man slapped him right back.
The scene required me to stand there. This guy walks over to me and he slaps me in the face. And I look at him fiercely and walk away. And I said to Walter, you can't do that. I said, let me tell you a little bit about America and the texture of American culture as it stands. That is dumb. It is not very bright. I said, We're in the 60s. This is 1968 or 7. You can't do that. The black community will look at that and say, that is egregious. Because the human responses that would be natural in that circumstances, we are suppressing them to serve values of greed on the part of Hollywood, acquiescence on the part of people culturally who would accept that as the proper approach. I said, you can't do it. I said, you certainly won't do it with me. If you want me to do this, not only will I not do it, but I will insist that I respond to this man precisely as a human being would ordinarily respond to this man. And he pops me and I'll pop him right back.
Talk about agency.
Yeah.
1967.
1966 when it was
66, right? Mm-hmm. Jim Crow is still alive and well in America. Matter of fact, they couldn't even film the movie in the South.
No.
They had to film it in Illinois or something like that, right?
Yeah.
I think they filmed a couple of scenes.
They filmed it, actually, they filmed it in Sparta, Illinois.
Sparta, Illinois, right.
Two Spartas.
Didn't they do some scenes in Tennessee or something like that?
They were in
I heard about that.
I think they did. I think they did. They did for probably the outside of buildings.
Right.
Which is still crazy to me that, I mean, we're not talking about that long ago.
No.
67.
We're talking about
60.
a little more than 50 years ago.
Right. Well, not even that. Yeah, right. Not even 60 years. And they were still having to navigate through that stuff.
Well, the reason it was filmed in Illinois is because Sidney Poitier, there's a scene that we'll review where he's being chased by sort of Ku Klux Klan members. And that actually happened to him actually 2 to 3 years earlier, when he and Harry Belafonte flew down to the South.
I heard about that. I did hear about that.
Flew down to the South to give money to the civil rights movement, college students, to help them to continue the fight. And he and Harry Belafonte were actually chased by Ku Klux Klan members, and they were in definite real fear of their lives, because these Ku Klux Klan members didn't care if they were Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte.
Yeah.
So he insisted, this is something else he insisted on, he would not go to the South.
I don't blame him.
But looking at both movies, this is a question I have for you guys. How does that character, Virgil Tibbs, compare with John Prentice? I feel like there are a lot of similarities between the two characters.
Well, I did draw some similarities. I think the obvious one was that they both were kind of like at the top of their industry. Like they're both like he was a top doctor, and
Right, he couldn't be less than number one.
no, not at all. I think that Prentice versus Tibbs. I think Tibbs didn't care about decorum as much as Prentice did. Is that fair to say?
I don't know.
I mean, is Prentice slapping people?
No.
Right?
Maybe not physically.
No.
So I think that Tibbs, and then it's also the nature of his position too. He's a cop.
Right. So he gets to see kind of the worst aspects of people's.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Prentice was more of a sophisticated, I would imagine, more educated than a cop.
He's
traveled.
a doctor.
He traveled.
He traveled.
So
yes.
his
perspective
was broadened.
Right.
And since he didn't, not staying in this country, he didn't have to deal with what probably Tibbs had to deal with more, because Prentice traveled more. I'm just so fascinated. I don't mean to break, but I'm just thinking about, and maybe I relate to this as well. But people are so quick to criticize a black man for not perpetuating certain stereotypes. But he's actually
For not perpetuating stereotypes?
maybe that's not the best description, but like your own community would knock you for not acting or not playing into the role of the community. If that makes better sense.
Right.
Well,
Right?
we
'Cause
are
that's-
a creature. We are creatures of the current moment, right? So, regardless of what's going on, people will judge you accordingly in that current moment. They
Right.
may not feel that way
Right,
years
but,
from now.
But the implication of an Uncle Tom is someone who is on the other team, someone who likes white culture more than black culture.
But you remember in that particular context, you have the SNCC, that group. You have the young people who have more of an urgent need for civil rights,
Right.
And they see they're not educated. Educated is not the word. They're not experienced enough to see
That's the
where
word,
Sidney
experience.
Poitier is coming from.
Right.
So they see him as like he's a relic from the past. We need to move forward. Here's this old guy telling us what
They're
civil
not
rights
looking
is.
at him in context.
Right.
That's it. Because if they knew about him and how he stood up for himself and how he broke so many barriers, they would never have called him.
Well, I mean, it just leads to the other question that I have, right? And you kind of touched on it. Does the responsibility of forgiveness and competency fall more squarely on the shoulders of a Virgil Tibbs character, or even on our shoulders as black
when
men?
you say competency and what?
Competency in any industry or any profession that we are operating in.
Mm-hmm.
We're simultaneously called to be forgiving and to be competent.
Well, the thing about
does
it,
that fall more on the shoulders of someone like Virgil Tibbs than the other characters?
it does.
It does.
You know why? Because if you look at the movie itself, all the other characters are allowed to be as verbally abusive and just even physically
erroneous.
abusive, and physically abusive as
Yeah,
possible.
Yeah.
And the time where he is assaulted and responds to the assault, there's talk about like, well, he could have gotten shot.
Right.
So as people of color, you have to sort of hold all of that in and know the right place to let it go, because if you let it go at the wrong time, you could lose your livelihood or you could lose your life.
Right.
It's like, the thing that parallels to today is you could be pulled over by a police officer and you've done nothing wrong. And if you go, I need to know what I've been pulled over for, which you have a right to say. If you say it in the wrong tone to the wrong person, you could die. You could die right there at that moment, or you could get really hurt.
Some may argue that.
Even by some may argue that.
Some I've said that. I've said that it's strategic. We have to, as black men, we have to be strategic out there in them streets. And there's some times where I would love to tell a police officer exactly how I feel or conduct my way in a manner that represents how I feel. And my better instincts, like, I just want to go home. Some people feel like we're not teaching that crooked cop the proper lesson.
But we don't have the power to do it.
Yeah, but then how do we break it? And which is not a question that we have to answer now. I was just
It's a rhetorical
yeah,
question.
Yeah.
No, I hear what you're saying, but it just plays into what Reginald was asking, which is, I think we all agree that as unfair as it is, we're the ones that have to sort of police the situation. Mm-hmm. We have to calm the cop down. We have to de-escalate, even though it's his job to his or her job to de-escalate.
Yeah, and
we have to make sure that what we're saying is not held against us.
Right.
The thing I wanted to bring up also is the sheriff, Gillespie, the character called Gillespie. The thing about that particular character, and that's the thing that people of color, regardless of if you're black or Asian or mix, have to deal with, is sort of being in the presence of incompetency.
Oh my God.
You know, and making sure that you don't rub too hard up against the incompetency, so that the person who is incompetent doesn't realize in front of you that they're incompetent, because there could be repercussions for it. And you know, I see that particular character as the character who's trying to uphold that particular Jim Crow kind of segregation. That I think that if you were to sit down with that character, that character would feel that's their job, not being a sheriff to everybody, but upholding that segregation.
Yep. Well, a sheriff is an elected official, so he has to uphold it.
Right.
At the, expense, for lack of a better term, of him being reelected. You know,
Yeah.
at the fear of not being reelected.
So let me ask this question. I know I'm taking time away from you, but do you think that particular character, the Gillespie character, I'll ask Mark this, do you think that character grew in the film? Do you think there was some growth to that person?
Yes, but I don't think he really mentioned that you had that growth. You kind of have to figure it out as in the audience, as the viewer, to see the growth, because I think there was a lot of tension going on there, where you see that character simply just exploding and letting out all this anger, and you're like, well, all right, I see that you're upset and I see that you have your opinion, but even though like Sidney Poitier's character is right, it's not like he's going to come out and say you're right. He's not. I mean, he refused to do that. That's how I felt. So even if he did, at the end, I was like, you know what? Deep down inside, he's completely right. He's not going to come out and say it.
What do you think, Tony?
I remember watching the movie for the first time, and this is recent. I'd just seen the movie maybe a few years ago before I rewatched it again. And I was waiting for that moment where, the white guy has that aha moment. I was really a horrible person moment. Mm-hmm. I think he was, like what you said earlier about, he was in that place where he needed to keep his role. And I think what's happening with him is very similar to what happens with a lot of people today. They know that there's injustice, but they don't say anything. They don't do anything.
I mean, I think the change happened at the slap. Because I think even though Poitier insisted on it, I think that the director and probably the writer who would include it in there, it had kind of a ripple effect throughout the film. Obviously, that's the thing that people remember the film for. But in the immediate moments after the slap, there's a look on the sheriff's face, Gillespie's face, like, oh my God, he just slapped him. What am I going to do? And then Endicott's like, what are you going to do? He's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think he had, in that moment, admiration for Tibbs, because he's like, if he, very much like the agent, it's like, if he's crazy enough to do that, that's a guy.
He must be something special.
Yeah. And also, I don't know if you guys notice, there is the butler who was bringing the lemonade out.
Yep.
And looked at Endicott like, how could you do that? In the same way, I remember I heard this story about Birth of a Nation when it came out, and that's the film that kind of revived the Ku Klux Klan, and how D.W. Griffith had a black maid, and the black maid showed him how disappointed she was in him. I don't know if it had an effect on him, but that was the kind of look that servant gave to Endicott.
Yeah.
And when everyone else is gone, Endicott starts crying because he realizes. I don't know. I mean, I'm projecting here. Maybe the character realizes, I'm no longer the guy who can dictate what these what these niggers do.
Yeah. But I think also him recognizing how competent Tibbs was. You know,
It was a threat. It was a direct threat.
Was a direct threat. But to your point, he kind of evolved in respecting him.
You're talking about Gillespie.
Gillespie, right. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason for that is he was undeniable. And with the fact that Colbert's wife insisted on him staying on.
Colbert, that is the murdered
the murdered person.
Right.
So it's not like he could get rid of him, but he had to work with him out of, you know, he was forced to really work with him.
Right.
But throughout that whole process, he gained a respect for him. But it's funny because you look at someone like Virgil Tibbs, right? This person not only was a detective, but this guy was apparently a medical examiner. I mean, this guy was Michael Bodden. You know what I'm saying? Like he's inspecting this person. He's rolling up his sleeves. Get me 20 cc's of this. Get me. This guy knows chemistry.
He knows botany.
He knows botany. He knows chemistry, and the white people who are watching this are like
amazed.
They're amazed, but they're more incensed at the fact that he
knows it and they don't
your
know
breadth of knowledge extends beyond just being a detective.
Yep.
That to them is a form of being uppity. When you're that knowledgeable, you're an uppity nigga. You know what I'm saying?
You don't know your place.
You don't know. But it's funny because this is a weird dichotomy that black people have to deal with, where for you to be successful in a society, you have to overachieve, right? And know more than what your field requires. But at the same time, you're going to be criticized, maybe lynched, maybe, maybe attacked by the very people who are employing you.
Right. And in order for you to maintain that position without being harmed,
you have to be indispensable.
Not only indispensable, but you have to seem grateful for the fact that you're smart.
Right.
Even though you've achieved that, you have to.
Thank you for letting me be smart, massa.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because being uppity to them is a form of upstaging them.
Yep.
Yes.
They don't like that.
Yep. Right.
Because that flies in the face of white supremacy. How am I supposed to be a supreme person? You know more than me? You're more competent than me?
Do we do that? I mean, I can't front. I do that all the time. Anytime I get a chance to show what I know in front of people who think I don't know, I do it.
But hold on a second. Before we go into that,
go ahead.
I wanted to say that goes into the question that you were asking me earlier with the character with the sheriff. It goes in, as in the person that Sidney is, he had to recognize that himself, right? Because I think he does that himself. I think he's kind of
does what himself
in terms of what we just explained about being reserved. My point is this. Let me just get to the point. I can go in detail with that. Anybody could be very angered about what happens, and then you're gonna want to react. You're gonna want to scream. You're gonna want to be violent because you're emotionally affected by what's happening. In this character with Mr. Tibbs, if you're thinking like anybody else, it could have been so easy to just go out and just slap the sheriff, knowing that you got that anger out. But you have to be reserved. That's not the way you're gonna go about it. And I feel like that's what's so smart about the Mr. Tibbs character in terms of analyzing everything that's going on, seeing everything, how everything is happening, and how to orchestrate and direct everything to make that solid point, to speak another language, to time everything. Like those are things that as a black man would have to control. I think Tony was about to start to go into that, and to strategically go about that to make your point valid for everyone to now turn the light off for you. And that's just the first step. And now we're going to the next step, which is to a phase where you're so proving that your point makes complete sense and to now solve it. Right? So that's how I feel about that.
But that's the thing about the film, too. It's kind of, there's a lot of wasted time. There's a lot of wasted time because he has to, for everything that he says, he has to prove it.
Right. Yeah.
Even though he's the number one detective,
right?
Even though he shows over and over again that he's competent, he's overcompetent. Right. But he's like, no, this is the way to do it. And they won't listen to him unless he proves it.
Even though he's a top person, he still has to prove it.
Yeah. And that's, to sort of retort to what you're saying about like you feel like you know whenever you get a chance you prove yourself.
It's a waste of time.
It's a waste.
It is. It is.
And
I do agree.
And it's not even so much the waste of time for us who are not as powerful, but it's a waste of time for even the white supremacists because they're losing out on our competency.
Right. It depends on what end you're looking at it, though. It depends on what end. It's not a waste of time for us if we're making sure that the result doesn't end off with our lives and our time.
Right. I'm just talking about in general, like at work or, you know, you're talking to your neighbor and, you know, they might mention something. Like perfect example. I'm at a, when we were in Napa Valley at the wine tasting in California and we were speaking to this gentleman, white gentleman, and he immediately, you could tell he's a good salesperson. Good salespeople are going to find something that they can connect to you with, right? So he sees me, big black guy, and he immediately starts talking about sports. You play football? And I was like, no, I didn't play football. No, I was more of academic in class. I was a nerd. You know, I just make sure to let him know that, no, I would.
Throw him right
off.
off.
I was like, nah, I stuck to the books, man. I was a nerd. But what a waste of time that is, though.
It's a waste of time, but I'm glad you bring that up because it's a minor situation, and it's kind of like, right, that extra few minutes could have been
because the person I listened to because it was like a large bar, so there was like a young Asian couple, a black group, and a white group. It was so funny because how it worked like that, right? Yeah, and then to the left, the guy I kid you not, he was speaking to the guy about like. Business endeavors and finances and investing, and then the Asian cat. What do you think he was talking about? Technology.
Yeah.
And then he's a big old, John Coffey looking guy. He just automatically thinks I played football. Right. That's all I was good for.
And I also want to add in when I talked about finances, he looked at me like I'm the sneaky person.
Yes.
Well, that's because
I totally didn't like that.
That's because there's nothing for them to really relate to us other than sports and music. Because our cultures, although we're under the same roof in terms of like country where we inhabit,
But I think it's deeper than that because I tell this to Barbara.
Here's what I'm saying though. Yeah. What I'm saying is that we live in the same country, but then our neighborhoods are segregated, our schools are segregated, so we don't really know. They don't really know. No.
But it's deeper than that because I tell this to my wife all the time, which is that for some white people, it's kind of like, and I'm using the Gillespie character again. It's kind of like, why is the dog talking? Why is it, that's a dog. Like, dogs are not supposed to talk. They're not supposed to be smart. It's a kind of, it's an inability to see our humanity.
Granted, that you're right. We
because
we talk about that all the time.
Because when you meet a white guy, you don't immediately go, oh, this is, he's I'm going to reverse this. This guy's a captain of industry because he's white. Right. You go, this guy's Paul. What does Paul do? Hi, Paul. I'm Reginald. What do you do? The guy didn't greet Tony like that. Well, he immediately started with sports.
The point I'm trying to make is the reason why someone could make that assumption that we could only relate to each other vis-a-vis sports because they don't know about our culture. At the very root of that is them thinking that maybe we're not as human as we portray ourselves to be. I give you that.
Yeah.
There is that element to it.
No, but I would say that's it.
Because that's the foundation of it. But I think that if you because the reason why I disagree with you is because you put people in the same environment, they grow up together, you don't have that problem. You put people who are progressive, and I use the word progressive as just something for us to agree that is a feature that helps in race relationship.
But Reginald, I'm going to fight you on this because
before you fight me, let me finish my thought.
Okay. You will not finish your thought.
Bing, bing, bing.
When people are allowed to grow up together and to empathize and to take a peek into the other culture and to even live in the same communities, share the same resources, go into, have Thanksgiving dinner with one another, have our kids intermarry. You know what I'm saying? Like when we really live as a community and not just go to work, go to restaurants and go home in a completely different neighborhood from where my colleague lives and from my colleague lives, we won't know about one another. Mm-hmm. That is very important. There are certain communities in America and around the world where black and whites, they have a respect for each other because they know of each other's culture.
I have a retort. I have
them.
a retort to that.
Yeah.
I know.
Although it's rare, I'm not saying that it's a common thing. But there are certain people that I know personally. They grew up together. Mm-hmm. One is white, one is black.
I have a retort to that. I have a friend of mine. His name is Andreas. He's from Germany. Mm-hmm. He grew up in an all-white community. His family's all white. When he came to New York, he never saw himself as he never saw other people as well, he's lesser than me because he's not German or because he's not white. Uh-huh. It's an understanding, it's an appreciation of another person as a human being.
I understand that, but what you're making it seem to be is that that's the only thing that drives that thought process. That's a pathology.
That's the driver. That's the engine.
I'm not going to disagree with you.
Right.
But I'm saying though, that being said,
right,
there's layers to this, and even if the foundational layer to this is what you mentioned, mm-hmm. if our society, if we allowed our people, if we evolved past even the civil rights movement into 2021 with gradual steps towards systematic change, the problem that we're having now would have been much less serious than what we have now. Because we would have been allowed to really uproot that foundation, mm-hmm. break it. Because mm-hmm. the foundation is allowed to remain because this is being perpetuated and taught to younger generations. So once you start to have people collaborate, much more than just on a professional level, but you have people, appreciate each other's culture mm-hmm. and not have this rhetoric of, xenophobia, or this rhetoric of, we're better than this person.
You're right.
That is the weed that's choking the flower of progress.
So what's dancing in my mind as you're talking is that I think those conversations do take place, which I'm sure they do. Do they? What
conversations?
Conversations saying that I want to understand this different culture or this different mm-hmm. kind of living or thinking. Do they always keep black culture at that same level? Like they'll acknowledge everybody else but the black culture. That's what I'm thinking right now.
But I think that's what Reginald is saying. Reginald is saying that we're not given seats of representation. So the larger culture doesn't see us as equal.
No, look at the education system. I mean, to this day, the history books are littered with how great Greece was and how great the Romans were and the Empire of Roman and whatever, but they never talk about the early civilizations where Kemet and places in Africa, Egypt and all those things, and right. Rosetta Stone.
They never speak about language. The fact that Ethiopia is kind of the birthplace of, the homogeneous man, Homo sapien.
Yeah, homogeneous. Right, and I think that's a part of it where, there's a reason, and I probably say this all the time, but there's a reason why I can tell you the nuances between Florence and Sicily, and someone can't tell the difference between a Jamaican and a person from Guyana.
Yeah.
Right.
When we look at systemic racism and certain laws that are in our society or policies that prevent us from having access to resources, this further perpetuates the problem. We talked about redlining all the time, right?
Yep.
Redlining is redlining to me,
and it's shown in the film because right. the sheriff drives him.
That's right. That's right.
To the black part of town.
Yep.
So when you redline, you're not saying I don't like niggas. The person who might have authored a particular type of redlining zoning rule may publicly say, I love Mark Barozzi. He's that black friend I was telling you about that I know, right?
But I'm still trying to protect my property value.
Right.
I mean, a lot of the black people are not like you, Mark.
Right. Because I think what's worse, and not
so I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that is one example of why that person doesn't know that you as a black person might be a person that's very competent in other areas than sports. You could be a robotics guy.
Right.
You could be an architect, which you are, Warren. He could have approached Warren and think, this guy must be
I mean,
an avid sport person.
I've had the first day I showed up on one of my jobs. They're like, "Yeah, what about that basketball game?" I'm like,
You don't watch basketball.
I don't play basketball.
So, with all this discussion that we're saying in terms of understanding each other, in the movie, there was a lot of wasted time, like we said a moment ago, right?
Yeah.
And so with all that dialogue that was happening, even as the viewer or the person who's speaking to defend themselves, in this case, Mr. Tibbs, it's like, I have to do all of this just to be heard. Yep. And then the only thing anybody remembers in terms of it being a great impact, which was a ripple effect, was the slap in the movie. All right, but hold on a second. So when he slapped him, what happened is that he got everyone's attention. Yes. Even though that's probably not the best thing you should do up front. But my point is, I see it as all the talking that we're doing as to how there should be a better understanding, a discussion, and having a space at the table to even have a discussion is not happening in terms of the black culture. But if it was, I think it has to be, from what I'm seeing, a slap, which is an action that has to take place for it to be respected. Because when you think about Asians or Jews or anybody who said, I don't want to be left off the table, I want in, they took action. I'm not saying it was in violence, but it was an action.
So is it more important to be respected than liked?
Of course.
In this context of the conversation?
But it's not, we don't have that choice.
That's not the question.
I understand your question, John. I think it's
right.
It's more important to be respected.
Like
Stephen Fetchit was liked.
He wasn't respected.
He was not respected.
But even though he was a smart man.
But they didn't know that.
They didn't know he was a smart man.
Right. Because we're going into a circular conversation now because it's like they could never see his humanity.
The time that was wasted is that Mr. Tibbs was neither liked or respected. Because if he was respected, they wouldn't question.
Not everybody did. There are certain people that respected him.
Oh, sure. Wait a minute. The widow respected.
That's
him.
The point I'm making.
Right.
I think the kind of the counter scene to the slap scene is that scene where he's trying to comfort the widow. Mm-hmm. It's a very strange scene because he's trying to hold her to comfort her and she's pulling away. You don't know if she's sort of like, don't touch me, nigger.
That was done so well, though. Mm-hmm. That was done so well.
Don't touch me, nigger. Or she was sort of like, and then in the end, it turns out that she was just so overcome by the grief. But
also knowing
the drama of that
there's
scene,
incompetency in that police department, and she initially associated him with that incompetency.
Yeah.
And they want to be comforted by someone who she might have not have believed could solve the crime until she realized how competent he was later on. I think she gave him more respect later on.
Yep. Because
she realized how competent he was. To your point, Warren, I mean that initial scene where they first met, she kind of was pulling away.
Right.
I think she probably grouped him in with the bumbling idiots of that department.
Right.
Yeah. It was a good film.
But one thing I wanted to ask you guys, does the characterization of Virgil Tibbs being so principled and having so much professional integrity appeal to the intended audience?
Intended audience mean mostly whites.
I'll let you tell it.
It's a hell of a question.
I'll let you tell it. That's an open-ended question in the way, in the sense of who's the target audience.
People in Mississippi.
That's interesting.
That's a very good question.
White Anglo-Saxon Southerners?
I think that they still didn't see his humanity. I think they saw the fact that he was the best dressed person on screen all the time.
Yeah.
And they saw him as a good-looking
guy.
guy.
In that movie. He was clean.
Yeah, he was clean. Everyone else was sweating except him.
Yes.
Yeah.
So true. They saw him.
Funny enough, it wasn't shot in the summer. It wasn't shot in the summer. If you notice the trees, they were like it was fall.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it wasn't the summer.
I didn't repeat that. Very good observation, Mr. Toby.
I can't take credit for it. I heard it. I read it somewhere, but I paid attention.
So, I think that they saw the projection of him, the projection of this persona, but they didn't see neither the character nor the actor behind the character.
Yeah. So what's the answer? What do you think? Who do you think the target audience? Oh, was there even a target audience?
It has to be, because it's a mostly white country, right? So it would be, especially at that time where, this is before Spike Lee and all the other kinds of black filmmakers were targeting their, not so much targeting their work to only black.
Yeah, but it's putting out there, yeah.
But they're putting their sort of unapologetically putting out the African American culture out there. This is before that. I don't think ultimately. I think on one end, it was successful in the sense that people like Sidney Poitier and opened the doors for people like Denzel Washington and Spike Lee, but I don't think that they were successful in winning the hearts and minds of the typical sort of let me reframe that. I don't think he was successful in getting the hearts and minds of most of the white population of the United States.
It was a good attempt. I think his intent was to do that. Jewison.
Yes.
And Silifant,
yes,
the screenwriter. But we were still stuck in this quagmire of like this gradual change that really ended up frustrating young black Americans. And look at us now. I mean, the gradual change is still, the ship is still moving very, very slowly.
This episode was moderated and produced by Reginald Valentine, Tony Sherry, Mark Barozzi, and myself.
The audio clips of Sidney Poitier were taken from the archives of the Academy of Achievement and episode 18 of Alice Winkler's What It Takes, an Academy of Achievement podcast.
Next week, a very contentious discussion on the legacy of Harry Belafonte through the lens of 3 movies. Thank you for listening to Antilles.